Hey everyone, you are listening to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. This little banter is about a car ride long and features your hosts, JJ Parker and Melissa Albers. JJ owns a tech company and Melissa has been a coach working with influencers for the last 18 years.
So, Melissa, we're talking in this episode about validation.
Yes.
Right. So when we started, just moments ago talking about like, hey, we're going to have an episode about validation. You and I really started kind of stumbling around
Right.
what validation is. Like we're talking about like, we have a loose plan for our podcast, but this one, we're like, where do we even start with this topic and this idea of validation, right?
Yes.
So first thing, of course, we run to the dictionary to figure out what this word actually means. So validation in our context is recognition or affirmation that a person or their feelings or opinions are valid or worthwhile.
Okay.
So that's an interesting definition.
Yeah. And I really like this topic, despite the fact that we're having a little bit of a hard time getting into the conversation. I think that, like I always say, putting the cookies on the bottom shelf, making this easier. It's like, I think for our whole lives, from the time we're really young, people encourage us to act a certain way publicly or socially or in our family units or whatever. And when we do that, we get the payoff, right?
You get the validation.
Yes, you get the validation, you get their approval, right? And it makes you feel good. Like, oh, I'm part of this. I'm cool. I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Everybody thinks I'm so awesome. And I remember, like, as we were talking this morning, I remember my grandparents were both ministers, and I would live with them every summer. And they shared a church. They were co-ministers of a church, and in a really little town. And I would live with them all summer long. And then, of course, I was at church with them whenever they were. And they lived in a parsonage, which is the minister's home that is usually attached to the church or right next to the church. In their case, It was on the other side of this block. And so when I would show up there, my grandparents were always so proud of me. They were so proud of me. And I'm an only child. So, and I had a bit of a crazy childhood, but the consistency was always counted on there. And I remember that they had this little church, and it had like a steeple, and it had like a bell tower in the front where the rope for the bell tower would literally hang down all the way to the floor in the front entryway of this church. And Mr. Boynton would ring that church bell. Mr. Boynton didn't weigh 100 pounds, and how he got that bell rocking and rolling every single, I never figured that out. But anyway, every time I would walk into that church, it's like everything stopped, because the church was so full of older individuals, seniors and elderly, and some families, but I was like a movie star. And every summer I would get a little bigger, and people would pay so much attention to me, and they would make me feel so good. And then I started to play an instrument. So then I would start to play flute in the church services. And I got so much validation from those people that genuinely made me feel so good inside, because it was just, they were validating me because I was me, and I was the minister's grandchild, little Missy. I was called Missy. And I remember just kind of flourishing under that attention. But in hindsight, it's sort of interesting to think about it, because for me, and we always talk about extroverts, introverts, and that sort of thing. For me, I began to feel as I got older that was the kind of validation that made me know if I was being the right way or not. Right?
So there's the key right there.
Yeah, like that external validation is like, oh, are people treating me in a certain way? So that tells me that I should keep doing this. Like I'm
Hmm.
going to use their response to me as my guideposts for fitting in. And
Interesting.
I think though that what happened for me and maybe other people too, but I got so used to, if I just act this way and make people validate me, I know that I'm on the right track. I can keep doing this. But there comes a time and a place where as I matured, there comes a time and a place for everybody where we recognize what other people want us to act and be and do is really not in alignment with what makes us feel good.
Ah, so maybe for you, like nowadays, kind of being on stage in that way isn't isn't what makes you feel good
Right.
anymore, or certainly in certain situations, it's not.
Well, and so then let me give you a counterexample, which is very funny. So then on the other side of my family, we also have a bunch of ministers. It's like the family business, you know. Some people have the mob, I have ministry. What can I say? Um, and in this side of the family, very different kind of church, very large church, charismatic as all heck.
Mm,
Like, you know, an hour of singing and clapping hands and, you know, like really, really overt patterns of noise and, you know, all that other stuff.
mm,
And whenever I would go to that church, I looked just like my aunt, who was one of the pastors of the church.
mm,
And so I would get brought up to the front row of this church that had hundreds of people in the pews.
mm,
And they would bring people up to the front of the church to be saved.
mm-hmm.
And me being raised in this small country church was so out of my element, I had no idea how to act.
Interesting.
And yet, if you look at those two examples, you could say, oh, family member comes to church. Family member comes to church. Like there's certain expectations, right? I
Yeah.
had no idea what to do in that second example. And I
And
felt
then so how did
really
you act in
self-conscious.
that?
I was
Yeah, you
super
felt really,
self-conscious.
yeah.
Yeah, I was kind of embarrassed because I felt like I didn't fit in, but I didn't know how to act. And there I was like, oh, if I'm expecting all of these people to really like me because I have to act a certain way, I actually don't know what that is. And now I don't feel good. Like
Hmm.
I feel really uncomfortable now.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
yeah, and I just feel like, you know, as we develop and as we get better with self-awareness, to me, recognizing what makes us feel good inside is
Hmm.
so critical. And what validates us is a really good marker for us to use, you know?
Hmm.
Um,
The the uh the other thing, as I was looking up definitions of validation, I came across this other phrase: validation of feelings is vital to connecting with others.
oh,
Right.
wow.
So I I think we've probably all been in a situation. I mean, I certainly like uh, with my wife and kids, and the the chaos and the sometimes pushed emotions of trying to
Yeah.
like raise kids. I mean, we've gotten in uh, lots of discussions where you know one of us might be feeling a certain way,
Mm,
but we're not validating that, and it becomes like a really stressful part of
thing.
our relationship, you know.
Yeah. It
So
can turn into things like that you don't want.
mhm, yeah.
That's
So
really
from my experience, one thing's really interesting in the idea that um, there's validating someone's feelings, right? And there's a difference between validating someone's feelings and you having the same feelings, right? Um, or
exactly.
even like or even, it's like with me and my wife, she might have a feeling. I don't have it. I don't have that same feeling. Like a very easy example was we're coaching baseball this
Yeah.
summer is our first time, in any organized sports. And right after the first practice, we got this like nasty email from one of the parents, right? And my wife's just like exploded. This is just what happens with all these, we're helping out here and we get
We're
these nasty, and
donating
she's
our
just
time.
sideways mad, right? And I like really didn't care. Like I just couldn't have, I couldn't even conjure up any feeling at all. I just didn't care. And because I really wasn't validating her feeling, her anger in that moment, she got really mad at me. I'm like, why are you mad at me? I'm like, I'm not mad at anybody. Just like,
Oh
um,
my gosh.
so she was mad at the parent. She was mad at me, just kind of mad. And that just happens. But if I would have just validated her feelings and said something as simple as, yeah, that's super frustrating. I can see how you'd be upset about that. It would have
Yeah.
made all the difference. And, um,
There's so many
that
angles to
happens all
this
the time.
though. There's so many angles to this that I just love, like, because we could come at that conversation and that story from the angle that says you you are having your own emotions and feelings about it. So it's really hard to be present for other people's emotions and feelings when you're having your own, whether they match or
Hmm.
not. And then having the presence that, again, that's the self-awareness, having the conscious knowledge in real time, how you think, feel, act, right? And
Hmm.
being able to like real time be able to say, oh my gosh, okay, so this is how I'm responding. This is how this other person is responding. And how am I supposed to validate that other person, particularly when I haven't even wrapped completely my arms around how I'm thinking and feeling about this in this moment, which is
Yeah.
the whole human interaction. And
Yeah.
I think herein lies the question mark. It's like, at what point do we stop needing other people's responses to
Hmm.
feel validated ourselves?
Yeah.
That to me is the real question. And this is not to say we don't need people, we don't love people. Of course, I mean, yes, of course you do. But um, too often we meaning everybody, not just you and your story, not just me and my story, but like too often we need other people to tell us we're doing okay because we've lost the ability or never had the ability to validate ourselves.
Mm. So that would be external validation. I need external. I need someone
Yeah,
outside of myself to say, hey, it's okay that you feel and think this way.
yeah, yeah. And like you won't be okay unless you get that.
Mm.
You won't feel okay unless you get that,
Hmm.
which is very different than, boy, it sure would be nice to have some support, but
Hmm.
I know I'm okay either way because I know how I feel is really okay. Like the reason I'm responding to this is I understand why I'm feeling this way. And even if it's not popular or it's not like anybody else, I still know that I'm okay, that this is okay, that I'm responding this way.
Hmm.
That's a huge difference. Like that's the internal validation piece.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you think about it. And when we're first starting the conversation, um, when you're talking about your your the small church situation, and you started describing it, or what I was hearing was you're describing it like acceptance in that tribe, right?
Yes.
Acceptance in that group of people, and that's like a real fundamental human need, right? Like we need
Yeah.
to be in groups to survive, right?
Yes.
It's a real primal wiring
Yes.
in the brain, right?
Exactly right. Yep.
So and those primal wirings, like you can't go against them, right? As soon as you start going against some of that real deep wiring stuff, you get
Yeah.
real sideways. So
Yeah.
um, the idea that validation is part of how you know you're fitting in with the tribe, which is going to, in your monkey brain, right? In your primitive
Yeah.
brain is saying, hey, this is an essential part of survival. If I
Yep.
don't do this essential part of survival, I will not survive. You know?
Right.
But in our
Yes.
modern society, in our modern environment, that survival part isn't as necessary, right? It's not like we're all living in the woods uh,
Yeah.
looking
Foraging.
for food every day, right? Um,
Yeah.
but that's still there, and we have to understand it's still there,
Yeah.
and we have to understand how we work with it
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. I think, yeah, that's such a valid point and perspective that I hadn't thought
Thanks
of.
for validating me.
That's what I'm here for. I just want you to feel good inside no matter what. But isn't that interesting though? Like, because as society changes, how much it stays the same. As people
Yeah.
change, how much we stay the same. And it is literally the difference between wanting to be in the tribe because it feels right versus needing to be in the tribe and altering who you are because you're
Mm,
so afraid if you weren't in that tribe. There's a lot of
hmm.
tribes to choose from now.
A lot, yeah.
There's a lot of competing tribes now. And I
Hmm.
think as you develop, like, don't you feel like if you just look back over the last, like, even decade for you and like for me, if I look back over the last 10 years, my tribe has changed. Like who I
Oh
hang
yeah.
out with or who I go to for talking about things or seeking guidance, seeking opinion has really changed in 10
Hmm.
years. And I think that happens for all of us all the time. And then, but so many people feel like that's a bad thing. Like they feel
Mm.
guilty, like I'm leaving these people or these people don't fit me anymore. Is it me? Is there something wrong with me? Why can't I just be satisfied being in this group? Because this is how this group acts. This is how we validate each other. But it just doesn't fit me anymore. So what's wrong with me? Rather than, that's really interesting. Like I feel like I'm now ready to go and pursue some new tribes to see what else
Hmm.
is available. And I feel like that's the right thing for me to do. So even though the first tribe might not see that as a great thing, I know it's the best thing for me.
Mm.
It's really
Let's talk.
interesting.
Yeah, let's talk about, so I think we get external validation, right?
Yeah.
It's we feel something, we want someone else to say, yeah, that's okay to feel that way, then you feel, like you fit in, right? Um how, internal validation I think is really interesting to me. Like the idea that, do you think that internal validation is like a skill we work on? Are some people just born with more ability to validate internally? Is it a life experience that
Mm,
pushes people one way or the other? What do you think about?
that's so interesting.
Yeah, someone who's maybe like really, you know, how do you phrase that? Like good at internal validating, or maybe
Yeah.
doesn't need external validation. Maybe that's a better way to phrase it. A person who
Well,
doesn't need external validation, it comes from within. How'd they get to that state?
yeah, because um, how did they get to that state? That's so good because if you think about it, from the time we're really little, we are practiced in seeking external validation in everything. Like when we're at school, our teachers, our coaches, when we're in families, when we're in our neighborhoods, like the pecking order of what kid is the one on the top, right? Like our whole lives we're
Yeah.
in this external validation. And then I think and depending then on our family structures and our birth orders, all
Mm,
have stuff to do with that. And I believe truly that there's two things for me that have changed my ability to have more internal validation. So I'm just going to make a sweeping guess. So
I
I'm going to just make a sweeping guess.
like that phrasing.
A sweeping guess. Yes, a global lacking detail, which is my personality right there. Global lacking detail. Um, I would say that the two markers are self-awareness and self-confidence.
Mm.
So like, because I think first of all, yeah, like have you ever had friends where they're telling you to go do something or be something, or been in social groups or CEO groups, or where they're telling you you should do this, you should do that, but inside you're like, no, that's not right at all for
Oh yeah.
me.
Yeah.
So what made it get to that point for you? Like those are the two things I would say that I've worked for me, so that I
Mm.
start understanding that I'm okay. Like I want to feel good. Everything I do is because I want to feel good. So the
Mm-hmm.
decisions that I'm making in my life, not feel like the best, not feel false, but feel me, be in my centered space, be my authentic me. I feel good. Therefore, I make choices and decisions constantly to stay in that state of feeling good.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you were trying to lead me on a
Yeah.
particular path
Sorry.
here,
And then I threw you right off into
that's
another
fine.
one. That's different.
But uh, I'd say for me, like, especially and we've talked about it. Actually, we talked about it, I think, in maybe the triggers lesson about um, my feeling of like imposter syndrome
Yeah.
in like my CEO um, peer group, right? And uh, you're right on the right track there, because I could very easily be in that group, and all the time they're like, JJ, you should go do this and that,
And they
and
do that. They do that
act
all
it
the
all
time.
the time, every meeting, uh, and act in like a particular way that a classic CEO would either act or run their company, right?
Yep. Yep.
But
Yep.
that's not how I run a company. That's not
Nope.
how I act. That's not how I do things. That's not me. Like, I'm an art school kid. We don't run things like a typical company runs it. And it took a while for me to be okay with that. You know,
Yeah.
it took a while for me to
What do you
understand.
think helped you be okay with it?
Um, well, for me, it's really been this idea of like just accepting myself, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
Accepting myself, accepting my story. This is it, um, and then actually being proud of that stuff, like I am really at this point proud that like I have a different way of looking at things, and it helps that it works, right? That's the
Yeah.
other part of it that
Well, that's what I was
is
going to
helpful.
say.
If it turned
Yeah.
into a disaster, then I'd probably not be so confident.
But you have lots of years of experience. You have, I don't
Yeah.
even know how many employees you have at this point. Lots. Um, all of those things that you have been, the building blocks that you had in your heart and your mind, that didn't look like the building blocks of the traditional way of thinking. You just kept building them
Yeah.
quietly, doing your thing, um, even if it was unpopular.
Hmm.
And you have had great success. And at times where other companies have had troubles due to, whatever, the socioeconomic climate or whatever, you guys have still done really well.
I thought you were going to say the psychopathic behavior of CEOs.
Oh, no, I wouldn't say anything. I've
No.
got, we travel in too small of a circle to say anything like that publicly.
Oh,
We would
good.
not be
I hope this.
validated.
I hope this podcast isn't recording. It's okay. No one listens to it anyway. Um, as I was reflecting, as you were talking about your childhood things, and now we're talking about kind of like my career, and I was
Yeah.
thinking about my childhood things and what I was being validated as a child, and again, personality trait plays a big part of this, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but for me, I think I was really validated for like just sort of staying quiet, keeping my head down, and doing
Mm,
work, right?
mm, mm.
Um,
Yeah.
I remember very distinctly, I was in seventh grade, and my English teacher, I was there before class because I always got there before any other kids got there because I wasn't screwing around in the hallways. And I was sitting there, and she goes, JJ, I just love you. You're the best student I've ever had. As a seventh grader, I was just like, I had no
Okay.
idea. You love me? Like, no, teachers don't have emotions. They live here at school. Um, but I, but that was her saying, like
Yeah.
validating, like, I like that you're quiet and you just do your work and I don't have to deal with you, right?
Mm,
You don't make a ruckus. You don't, you
mm,
know, and for me, it's like when I when I get emotionally overwhelmed, I definitely go into the quiet, heads down, no one can see me kind of space,
mm.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's interesting, right? I think it would be like, I think it's interesting to just sort of reflect. This conversation is really like curious. Like I'm going to be thinking about this now because we've really brought up some cool things about it. But I think it would be really interesting to consider how you were raised. Like, how did you get validated when you were
hmm,
being raised? And
that is
when,
an awesome question for everyone to contemplate.
yeah, that, and then how do you get your validation that you need today? So
Hmm.
leave it more open ended. Like, how do you get your validation that you need today? Does it come from your own way, your own thoughts, your own being, or do you seek it from other people, or is there a balance? How does that work for you?
Hmm.
I think that's really, really interesting.
What a great question. So we should just leave it there.
We should. We can keep
We should
talking
pick
about this.
well, we should pick up that conversation like on Facebook and
Yes, great.
and um, go on Facebook and tell us what you think, and we can
Yeah.
we can we can continue it with everyone there.
Continue the conversation later. We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. Our mission is to help people become happier and more effective by gaining insight into their own thoughts and feelings. We'd love your support. First, share this podcast with anyone you think might enjoy it. Second, leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast site. This helps others discover the podcast so we can reach more people. And third, sign up for our newsletter at theselfawarenessjourney.com. This will help us communicate better with you and build our community. Thank you so much for joining us in the Self-Awareness Journey. We'll see you next week.